talk a bit more about that. So we're ready. 10 things we want to do next year. Drum roll. First of all, they're in no particular order, so please don't think I prioritised them to happen. Number one thing we want to do is we need to improve our facilities. We need to improve our facilities. If we're going to double in size, which we believe God's doing already, and we're seeing people join us, and that's fantastic, we need to prioritise our facilities. We've talked about excellence and attention to detail. Can I say Pastor Tim loves me? You always know someone's coming when I say that, don't you? And you know I do love you. But how can God entrust us with something big and glorious if we can't look after something that we've got now? And that's harsh. And it's back to that word responsibility. Now, here's the meanest I'm going to get. How many of you noticed the car park's a mess? 3 months it's been a mess after a fire. We booked a skip to clean it up and only 3 men turned up. And the thing is, and I know it's negative, and I don't want you to take it as a caning because there's a lot more positive things to come, but it's just an example, and please hear my heart, how many of us can see that and walk past it? There was another incident where there was mess in the carpet before we opened. And people can, step over it. Why? They see it. There's people who don't see it. I can sometimes fall into that. There could be something glaring. Jill can come in after being out and say, haven't you seen the room's a mess? And because there's football on the telly, I'm seeing nothing out of that parameter. So there's people who don't see it, there's people who see it and don't do anything about it, and there's those that take responsibility. So when we see a need in the house, it's our responsibility. And I think some of us look or step over it and say, it's somebody else's responsibility. If we're going to build the house of God, if we're repositioning, if we're going to create something, we need to say, that's my responsibility. I'll share a positive thing this morning, I'm not going to embarrass anybody. But for some reason, the people who were down for hospitality either were a bit late or whatever it was, it's not a problem. But as we were looking to do something else, someone came to me and said, we've got to do this something else. We've got to do the prayer, actually. But actually, I've seen that no one's doing this job. I will do it. It's great, because they took responsibility. They didn't just say, there's nobody doing it. They took some responsibility in that, and that's great. And I just want to encourage us, even though there's a few negative things there, but we need to take responsibility. And that's the thing about the Good Samaritan. 2 people walked past the guy in the road. They were concerned, but they didn't take any responsibility. And I want to encourage us as a house of God, that when we see need, and it's not just about building, it's about a whole host of other things, we need to take responsibility. When people say, where are you? I say to myself, my church is PICC. And you get some Christian theologians or whatever they are that always try and nitpick. There's a few of them around. And they said, when you say my church, it makes it sound like your possession. It's Jesus' church. I said, that's fair enough, it is Jesus' church. But I say it's my church because it's the church I belong to. It's the church I'm proud of. It's the church I want to be in. It's the church where God has placed me. So whatever you say, it belongs to Jesus, but it's still my church. Amen. It's our church. Yeah. We need to take responsibility. So the first thing we need to do is we need to action things on our building. Whether that is moving to a new building, and that's still on our agenda, but we need to make some drastic changes, which Emma will talk about in a few moments. But it's our responsibility. It's not the cleaning team, it's not Orlando's, it's not the worship team, it's not the leadership, it's our responsibility in that. So the second thing we need to look at, and it's on the planning board at the moment, and I spoke to somebody about it today. We are going to review the small group system. Okay? There's going to be some surprises, there's going to be some changes. We're in the process of talking and consulting with some of the leaders to tell them what we're thinking and pray into that before we launch it towards the end of the year, most probably September. The reason is that not many people are in small groups, only 30 of our people, which is not very many, when we need to be looking more like 100. So we're going to change how we do them, how we approach them, and put more of an emphasis on, because this is how we build our community. Our celebration is great, but we need to build and work at our community. So small groups are going to go up our priority. We're going to champion them more, campaign them more, help them to become more accountable, more resourced, and the better. Someone said to me, I'm not embarrassed them, but someone said, oh, my hungry wasn't on this week. And that's fine, I know there are reasons, but we have to build a structure because people need that input, people need that community. There's people in the house who've grown in God this year because of their connection to a small group. So we need to put that top of our priorities. And I'd ask you to pray and consider these small groups are not just for other people, they're for you. To join and connect to our community, to grow, and also to help others to grow. It's not just about what you get out of it, it's what you put in it as well. So that's the second thing. Third thing, evangelistic projects. Woo! Oh, that's great. Evangelistic projects. Some of you may know there's a thing called Hope 2014. And we are joining with other churches. We are discussing it. We are praying into initiatives. In fact, I'll give you a taster. They're not confirmed yet, but one of them is to do an Easter celebration in Cathedral Square. Not a funeral service, not something to commemorate that Jesus died, although that's important, but to communicate that Jesus is very much alive. Not just in the four walls of the church, but in our marketplace, in the most public place, to say Jesus is alive and he changes lives. Not just as PICC, but as a whole church of Peterborough coming together. Not just for an ease up, but to actually proclaim the goodness of God. We're looking at some other events later in the year, enhancing fun days, all sorts of things. Why? So that we can win people for Jesus and tell Peterborough that God cares through practical and spoken word. So we're going to join with them, but also we need some of our own. And not just say, oh, the church are having an evangelistic project today. It's ours. It's our responsibility for neighbours. And so that's the third thing. Fourth thing, we're going to launch more into the area of social action. Now, there are some, and it's not true that says, well, there's a lot of social action we do already. We do the 316 shop is fantastic in what that does, and the people it helps and benefits and brings together. And there's other things we have done or are doing. Joy doing the meal for our more mature members and associated people. There's a lot that we do in the community, but we don't tend to shout about it. But we want to up the ante. And even yesterday, we were talking about how we can help people in debt through a credit union and making a partnership there. How can we help people on benefits, talking to CAB, and how we can get people trained in the house of God to help people practically. Can I tell you a story? I'm going to be careful with the details. But there's someone in our fellowship, they're not here today, and their neighbour committed suicide in the last few weeks. Horrendous. That person's actually been in our church, which makes it even sadder. And in their suicide letter, I gather, one of the reasons was because their benefits had been cut and they couldn't see much point. Now, that's not just one person, the benefits are being cut. They reckon by £400 a week across the board. There's some people in this congregation and here on the video who will say, yeah, tell me about it. The bedroom tax, that's affected me. This problem, that reduction. This is a real thing. Now, as a church, we can say, God bless them. I tell you what, we can even pray for them. But actually, we need to roll up our sleeves, understand the system and say, what it takes, we will help you. We will stand with you and we will speak life. You don't have to take your own life. You don't have to run away. You don't have to get yourself in debt. We as a church are going to stand with you. We heard yesterday as well about loan sharking. The amount of people who lend money illegally. Some of them are lent legally through legal lenders. Extortionate interest rates. We as a church have something to say about that, don't we? About the exploiting of the poor. The Bible's full of these things. But again, we need to take responsibility. We need to reposition ourselves. We need to say, we are going to do it and we are going to do this well. Another thing that's been long overdue and we are in discussions with, how many remember the Scottish chap called Jay from Teen Challenge? Do you remember him standing here preaching with the Teen Challenge? God has been drawing us together. And I mentioned because Teen Challenge is starting things called outreach centres where they connect with local churches in cities to serve the needs of the poor, to do food, some similar things we've done in the past. But this is a very well-structured thing also with rehab connected. And I said to him, it would be nice if we did one of those one day. And the person responsible happens to be Jill's cousin-in-law. And Jay said, oh yeah, we enjoyed our time in Peterborough. This God's got his hand on this place. And we had a great morning. Well, it took a month, and I actually got hold of Jill's cousin, Wayne, and I said to him, look, we've had these discussions, how do we move it forward? And he said, I've been in a meeting this morning, I've just come out of it. We gave a list of 30 cities that we're targeting for outreach centres. And Jane, who is the national director, pointed at the list and said, the first one we want to do is in Peterborough. Okay. So God is moving. But shall I tell you something? If I said, Ammon, the job's yours. Ammon's got a lot to do. I could say, Simon, we could wait, we could do that. But actually, we've all got to take some responsibilities. It's only going to work if we get volunteers from our congregation. If there's no congregations, there's people who aren't willing to train properly, get the right certification, to come under authority and leadership of somebody else, like Teen Challenge. It's not going to happen. So a lot of these things, they sound good, but it takes a commitment from us. So that's number 4. Number 5, and I'll whip through these. I'm just trying to whet your appetite. Not to think, oh, I belong to a great active church, but actually I want you to think, how can I bear some weight and responsibility? Everyone cares, everyone carries, everyone contributes. So how can I help in those areas? What can I do? One of them is a Bible Academy. We're starting. Now, I'll be really honest with you. You know I'm nothing else, but Sunday nights are hit and miss. And for a church our size, when we get the numbers we get, sometimes we think, what's going on? Sometimes we do something special. Cafe Church and Ignite the Night are fantastic. Men's and women's are great. Because sometimes we just have a celebration and we even have guest speakers and we've had very few people, which tells me the demand or the content is not what it should be. So what we're going to do is Bible Academy. And what Bible Academy is going to do is going to bring us together for some worship, but then we're going to have teaching in 5 different areas. We're going to split up. We're going to have leadership training. We're going to have theology for those that want to get deeper into the Word and explore a bit. We're going to have discovery course for new people. We're going to have a worship central course running for those that want to join in the worship team. And there'll be some other, what I call hot potato issues about relationships, finances, what does the Bible say about some of those issues. We've got enough teachers in the house. We can invite some in as well. But do you know what? It's only going to be successful if you guys come to it. Because to be honest, we're going to do a booking system, and if no one books in for us as a topic, we just won't run it. There's no point in asking someone in the house or out of the house to prepare material to stand here and speak to no one. Okay? So if it's something that's a benefit to you, turn up for it. Otherwise, it won't work. To connect with leadership, this is a quick one. We're going to have some open surgeries. A bit like your doctor has an open surgery, where you just go down and find out what's wrong with you, which was my case last week, coughing and spluttering. So what we'll do is we'll advertise where some of the leaders will be. For example, you can guess I'll be at a breakfast establishment, drinking coffee. And the idea is to get out of the building, get out into the community. And if you've got a need or know someone's got a need, you can say, go and see such and such. They're going to be there between 8 and 12. It's a breakfast place at probably between 8 and 1 for my case. But, you know, it's just go, no pressure, no problem, just go and spend some time with a leader. If you've got something on your mind, talk it through. We want to be more accessible, okay? But again, it's something that you need to use and prioritise and connect in with. Very quick, number 8 is prayer focuses. Some of those are happening already. We want to do more with prayer, more to encourage people praying. We've kind of dragged our heels a little bit, well I have. But there's some things that we can introduce and we're going to talk through. But there's some things that are happening already, and if you've been to some of the late night prayer meetings, they have been absolutely amazing. We can't pray too much, so those prayer focuses, listen out for them, and again, get involved in them. Leadership development is number 9. We want more leaders in the house, as Ammon said. Leadership is not a closed shop. It's not something for elite few. We've all got the ability to lead someone somewhere. We are all leaders. But to lead, I'll be honest and blunt, you've got to be here. You've got to be in it to win it. You don't win the lottery by not buying a ticket. It's a bad example, but you don't become a leader by missing the house of God. You've got to be in it for God to speak to you and to get the influence that you need. Also, we're going to do stuff to help you. You need to commit to learn, to commit to grow, and to commit to serve. And then we'll see leadership just oozing out of people. But we want to intentionally create forums where people can lead more. Okay? Now, that's 9 of them. I'm going to give number 10 to Ammon. But before I do, I've just said all the things we want to do. I don't know whether that excites you. I don't know whether one area of that you think, that's really for me. That's something I really want to get involved in. That's great. But you know the biggest problem in church is the 90-10 rule. The 90-10 rule. And the 90-10 rule is this, that for church to work effectively, we could do it with loads to spare if 90% of our people gave 10%. Whether that's tithing financially, whether it's 10% of their time, 10% of their talent. By giving God a small portion, if 90% of people gave 10% of what they had, we would have more than enough to do all that God wants to do. The problem is this, that it's only 10% who do 90% of all that needs to be done. So instead of 90% doing 10%, we have 10% doing the 90% of the weight to carry financially, the work to do, the talent to invest. One thing I missed, and it examples that point, is our kids and youth work. We have 72 kids on our books, we have 22 youth. Thank God for every single one of them. But we've only got, I think it was 5 children's leaders. So if I was to say to you, to survive the children's work and to keep our leaders safe, we need to do children's provision once every 2 weeks, I think there will be an outcry. But the answer is not doing it every 2 weeks, it's having twice the amount of leaders. Who's going to take responsibility for our kids? Well, somebody will look after them. Hey, if we leave it to chance, those somebodies will be people at school, drug pushers, people we don't want our kids associating with. So we need to take responsibility for that. And same for youth, there's a very small team. One of our priorities in the next 18 months, we need to see and train and release and resource more leaders for our youth and children. Some of us, and I don't want to point at any fingers, I know there are gifted people in the house that can do that, but we need to take responsibility for our youth and kids. So there's some things, some responsibility. The 10th thing we need to do for any of this to happen and to bear responsibility is to build a financial platform for it to happen. And I'm going to ask Amon if he'd like to talk into a few comments on that. And add anything to the vision that he feels as well. And then we're going to have a bit of worship before we preach.
This is a little bit more about money. I think I must retire from talking about money, isn't it? We talk of God doing miracles, and in PICC, God does miracles. The miracle that I'm talking about is because it's only 10% of the congregation that gives to God. So the 90% of the church survives on what the 10% gives, and to me, that's a miracle. We have debated this several times with Pastor David even previously, that as long as we've got a purpose, God always provides the resources. But we have also come to a situation where we've realized that as a church, it is not good enough to live from hand to mouth. We need to be able to grow up. We need to be able to create some reserves and some resources. One of the reasons why we wanted to go to Broadway was not just because we could have a big congregation. We wanted to use part of the Broadway to do business. Yeah, can I emphasize that word, business? We wanted to create some businesses within the Broadway. So, one of the challenges that we have right now, which we want to share with you as a congregation, is we want to create some business opportunities and projects. We already have a little setup which is called 316, which Christine is working very hard on it. And a few limited volunteers are assisting her. It's not good enough as usual, it's the 10%. So the challenge is, if we are struggling to have a few people help at 316, we want to move further than that. We want to exercise the same vision we had into moving into Broadway. We wanted to set a coffee shop within Broadway, yeah? So we could allow people to come sit, drink, have cakes and something like that. Now, we thought we could have enough people with that talent within PICC. So although we have not moved to Broadway, we still want to do that. Can we be able to try that? We want to try all the ideas we had for Broadway, although we are not in Broadway. One of the reasons why maybe we didn't get into Broadway is we didn't have enough resources and structures. So we thought we should be able to start doing this now, than wait until we get a big building, and then we move into the building, then we try and do a coffee shop, Bibles, a Bible bookstore or something like that. We want to do those ideas right now. So we want to be able to generate some income, not coming through the basket, but coming through various projects. So that's one of the ideas we're trying to work with. So anyone with that interest, anyone who thinks there is an opportunity somewhere in doing something, please share with us. I know a lot of people are very good at sharing on Facebook. Now, unfortunately, a few of us struggle to get on Facebook. As much as we can, we would like you to give us feedback on these ideas via the PICC website. I think there's a discussion forum. I'm going to talk with Gideon that maybe people can use the feedback option that's on the website. So you can share your ideas. You can be able to say what you think we should do, because we are talking, I'm talking, Tim has given his ideas, but we will not be able to let everybody speak today. But you can go on the website, give us what you think, share with us, and we can read these feedbacks, put them together, and be able to pick an option of what we want to do. All right? The Broadway funds we collected the last 2 years, we have kept them as restricted funds. If I'm right, Mr. Moyo, it should be about 15,000, yeah? We have used the part of the money from the 21,000 to pay all the legal fees, because we restructured PICC to make it much more risk averse in terms of transferring the responsibilities from the trustees and making PICC as an entity that stands on its own right. So we have used part of that to do the legal structuring, and we've done that, we've gone beyond that. The other 15,000 that's left, it's still awaiting a new facility. So we're still looking for facilities. We are still in search, and we're not going to use this money for anything else. We have previously asked the people if they felt somehow cheated for their money because they gave for Broadway and we didn't go for Broadway. If they wanted their money back, they could claim it. We only have, so far only one person has claimed their money, and we have given it back to them. The rest of it is still there, and we are not encouraging you to claim it back. We are encouraging you. We are encouraging you to come up with ideas of a much bigger building. We are looking at a building where we can have a lot of facilities to do a lot of things. Pastor David and Judith have donated over 100 books that are stocked upstairs there. We are going to set up a library. Now, these books, you can imagine what they are. They are from different people. Most of these books are Christian books. We want to load them out. We want people to be able to come here if they want, sit and read and get the knowledge about the things of God. So we will set up a library, but we don't have enough space to do that. So we are looking for a librarian as well. Okay? So we have all sorts of activities going on. So we are asking you, as our family, as a member of PICC, to pick up on something that you feel you can contribute, to pick up on something that you feel is what you can do in PICC, and then come to us, speak with us, and we will let you do what you think you want to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. sorry there's a lot of talking this morning, it's not, but I think they're important things that we need to bring to the house. I think one of the biggest complaints we have is when people say, I didn't know that was going on, I didn't know this was happening. So we're trying to give you some tasters to get you involved, because it's our church. It's my church, it's your church. And you'd like to do that. I'm just going to get the Bible. We've got a bit of worship to do on this song as well, and we're going to possibly come around the table, although I don't want to rush it. In a little while, don't we, Chris? Sorry. But I'm not going to preach long, but I'll try and be as clear as I can. I can expand on all these points, which will be an hour. But I want to preach about an 85-year-old man, 5 young girls and a prostitute. It's just to make it a bit more memorable, but it is the Word of God, so don't worry. It's not some sort of weird and wonderful theology I'm preaching, it is biblical. Okay. I'll turn to the Bible in just a moment. But I want to look at 4 key words and a point, and I'll try and get through it as quick as I can. If you've got pen and paper and you're making notes, I can send some out as well. The 4 key words I'm looking at are defiance, despite, disappearance, and destiny. That's defiance, despite, disappearance, and destiny. And I'm going to look at those in regard to an 85-year-old man, 5 young girls, and a prostitute. So first of all, we'll turn to Numbers 27. Numbers 27. Okay. And I'll put my finger in there. Your homework is that you can read it for yourself when you get in. I will refer to it. This is where this is based. So first of all, we're going to look at the 5 young girls. And to paraphrase this a little bit, to give you a picture, what happened during the wilderness years, when the people of God had crossed over and were going into the promised land, there were 5 girls, and their father's name was Zelophehad, something anyway, beginning with Z. And their names were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. Now, there were 5 daughters, they had no sons. And what happened was the father died in the wilderness, and when they came to the promised land, they had no inheritance. They had nothing. They had no right to an inheritance. The only way they would get anything is if they were to marry and get some of their husbands. They had nothing for themselves. That's why I know they were young, because they were born in the wilderness. They were under 40, I know that for a fact. And because there's 5 of them, the oldest they could be was 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. But because they were not married as well, it makes me think they were younger women. And what happened was, and hear this, and it says in chapter 27 of Numbers, they approached, verse 2, the entrance of the tent of meeting and stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the leaders of the whole assembly. Our father died in the desert. He's not among Korah's followers who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin, and he left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear? I just want you to imagine something, just for 1 moment, and it's simply this. These were the leaders. Moses was the head kahuna, the head honcho. He got the high priest. So could you imagine President Obama meeting the Pope, the religious leader, the national leader, or David Cameron meeting the head of the Church of England, Justin Welby. And they're having a meeting, and they've got other leaders there in either a parliament building or some sort of conference centre. It's the head. And this is the equivalent that they just burst in there and said, hold on. This is not right. This is not fair. Now, the difference between that analogy and the biblical one is that Moses went to inquire of the Lord, which David Cameron probably doesn't do that often, especially when it comes to some of the laws he's passed and introduced lately. Welfare reform being one of them, but we're not going down that road. But can I just say the courage of these young women in a society that didn't listen to women, didn't value women as highly as men, who didn't really care, they, as 5, stood up and said, this isn't right. You see, the first word, defiance, they defied convention. They defied the way that things were. The way that things, the status quo, the things that were always like, they were always like. You know, if we take responsibility as a church, we need to defy convention. We need to say, if it's always been that way, then it's time for it to change.
That's right.
We need to change things. Not just settle down and say, it's okay, it's always been like that. For these 5 girls, they could have ended up in immense trouble. But it meant so much to them that they stood against everything they said about women. Despite the death of their father. You know, they'd lost their father, they'd lost their reputation, they'd lost everything associated that this man brought into their lives. But despite that, they were still going to receive their inheritance. You know, in our lives, we can have some severe knocks. We can lose a lot of things. Life doesn't work out, to be fair, all the time sometimes. But despite those things, sometimes we need to move forward. Well, you don't know what's gone on in my life, Pastor Tim. And I do sympathise in it, and I don't want to be clear. But sometimes, despite those circumstances have made us, some of our people, the way that we are. I talked about the 549 days that I was out of ministry and that I was struggling with all sorts of things. But I could have said, oh God, I've been 449 days. But despite that, I will serve the Lord. Wow. Despite what the enemy has planned for evil, that God has designed for good. Amen. What had disappeared? They had disappeared their name, their family name. As we know, if they'd all got the same surname in an English culture, as they married, they would all have lost their name. Anything that spoke of their father would have been lost. You know, we're in a generation that everything that speaks about our Father in heaven is lost. In our schools, in our finance systems, in our ethics, in every area, they want to get rid of the name of God. They don't want to talk about it. They want the name of our Father to disappear. But it takes some people with the spirit of these 5 girls to say, we're not going to let that happen. Amen. We are going to claim an inheritance in the name of our Father, because that's the way it should be. Amen. They were destined to inherit. That inheritance was theirs. And they weren't going to let the fact they were women, the fact their father had died, the fact that their family name would disappear, stop them from claiming what that God had got for them. What are you going to let stop you claiming what God has for you? We need to come against convention, against the loss of our fathers, the disappearance of our name. The last little point on that, before we move on to the next section, is they were responsible for justice, the battle for justice. What was happening was not right. Sometimes, if we want justice, we have to stand up. I don't want to get political, but I can't help but, having listened to a lot of stuff I did yesterday, some of the decisions that are being made and affecting the poor and the needy are getting worse, and it's just not right. There's a sense of injustice in our nation that no matter what the politicians say about social equality, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And that line that actually will take the top band of income tax down from 50% to 45%, and that will bring more money in. Hello, I'm doing maths at school. If you reduce something from 50% to 45%, you get less money. And yet we're told it brings in more money, while the welfare reform charges the poor to make up the gap. Sometimes we have to say enough's enough. Anyway, that's Numbers 27. Moving to Joshua 14. I'm going to be quick. Excuse me whipping through these, but I don't want to. There's been a lot of content today. Joshua 14 talks about an old man. You see, those 5 girls went into the promised land. But also going into the promised land was an old man called Caleb. He was a buddy of Joshua. He'd actually gone into the promised land before. He'd gone in with a group of other people. And he'd seen that there was fruit in the land, there was good stuff in the land. And he came out and he said, it's great, we need to be in there. And yet the others said, yes, it is good, but there are giants in the land. Caleb turned around and said, yeah, but together, we can certainly do it. And yet, the people went into the wilderness for 40 years. 40 long years. Now, the problem for Caleb was he'd seen what they were missing out on. Now, he could have got bitter, couldn't he? These stupid Israelite people. I'd been there having a hammock, and I'm near a palm tree, and I'd have been set up. But as it is, I've got to be 40 years in the desert with them. And he could have got bitter. But he didn't. He was 85 years old. They went into the promised land, and his passion for what God had said to him had not diminished at all. Give me my land and I'll go up and fight. Read this account in Joshua 14 for yourself. And you see, because when God has promised something, just as they defied convention, the daughters, he defied his age. Didn't matter how old he was. If God had promised it, he was going to have it. You know, there's so many of us, whether it's our age, our physical condition, our background, whatever it is, we think that because this has all happened, that God's changed his mind, that God's not going to do what he promised to do. But despite our age, despite our experience, God will do what he said he will do. He defied his age. Now here's the thing. The 5 daughters, they lost their father, the death of their father. I want you to think about Caleb. How many of his schoolmates went into the promised land with him? None. How many of his friends and relatives of his peer group went into the promised land? None. Everyone he knew and loved and grew up with had died in the wilderness. He was the only one left, him and Joshua. Of that generation, they were the only 2 left. Out of the whole nation. Despite the loss of a generation. Not just one person, a generation. He still knew the faithfulness of God. He still knew what God had promised. Sometimes, God doesn't work with, well, most times God doesn't work with the majority, he works with the minority. You might be the only person who believes for that. You might be the only person in your peer group, in your nationality, in those that are the same age who says, this is what God's going to do. You know, sometimes to get the promises of God, you might be the only one who holds on to it. You know, I was in a youth group of hundreds of people when I was younger. Well, I say hundreds, there was lots that came. I think we counted over 100 that came and gone over a period of 3 or 4 years. I don't think we're all 100 together. Lots of them. I go back, how many are still serving God today? I could probably count on one hand. That the generation's lost, but that God's promises to me and to people in that generation are still the same. You might be the only person, but despite that generation, God's still going to work. You know, it might have appeared that those promises had disappeared as they died one by one. And yet when Caleb got to the promised land, he saw the land and he said, that's what God's promised. And also he'd seen the fruit. He was destined for the fruit. He knew when he carried the fruit 40 odd years before, he knew that that was his inheritance. You see, sometimes we can taste the fruit, but don't do the hard work. Sometimes there's a gap between seeing the fruit and receiving the fruit. And yet, he never lost faith. He never lost the trust. And his responsibility was in battle. He was prepared to go and fight for what God had said. You know, I don't know whether it's the English culture. I know there's a lot of non-English cultured people originally here. But I think some of us catch it. And when we're told something, we're so polite. If it's the devil, if it's somebody else. We say, of course, that's the way it's always been. Let's not rock the boat. Let's not cause any bother. Here's an 85-year-old man that says, hey, that's my land because God says. God help anyone that's in the way. Now, I don't know about you, but 85-year-old men don't normally frighten me. But if one came towards me waving a sword saying, get out of my way, I think I'm going to move. I tell you something. Doesn't matter how old, whether male or female, what background. If somebody comes towards you waving a sword, and they believe what you're standing between is their inheritance and what God's given them, you better get out of the way. But the problem is, we know, we've tasted some of the fruit, we've seen it, and yet now we see the battle. And we think, well, I'm happy to stay as I am. If we want the plans of God, there's sometimes a battle involved. It never comes easy. Last but not least, I've not shot over, which is good. Joshua chapter 2 talks about a prostitute called Rahab. When we look at people who went into the promised land, we see an 85-year-old man, 5 young girls and a prostitute. You're going to build a nation, and that's what you're going to carry into the promised land. Yet God had different plans. You see, because the spies went in to spy the land, and she rescued them and hid the spies, and she said, look, can you say, when you come in here, can you save me? Now, bear in mind, the word of God was that you destroy everything. And yet in the wisdom of, hold on a minute, if you're going to help us, we are going to save you. So they said, if you tie a red cord from your window, everyone will know that everyone in that house is safe. And went to the promised land, this prostitute and all her family. So the defiance was of her occupation and her past. She was a prostitute. I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but she was a woman with very little or no morals. She was the lowest in society, and yet God chose her to go into the promised land. You see, you can sit here and say, Pastor, you don't know the life I've lived. You don't know what I've been doing. You don't know the things that have been said over me. But if God can use a prostitute, God can use any of us. And despite our past, despite our mistakes, despite our failures, despite the things that we've done that we are ashamed of doing, and we wouldn't want to be mentioned in public, God can still have a plan for us. He'll defy it all. God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. You see, and defied the occupation. Now, can you imagine these religious Israelites? Well, our fathers died in the wilderness, and now we're going into the promised land. And would you believe it? There's prostitutes coming in now. Prostitutes from Jericho. Can you imagine the leadership grief? I mean, can I just say, please forgive me, I've not thought this through, so I'm going to try and make sure this doesn't go wrong. And if I said, we promoted Simon into leadership, he's been to Mattersey Bible College. We promoted Ammon into leadership, he served God faithfully. We recognised Pastor David, because he's pastored here for 27 years faithfully. And the last person on leadership is a prostitute off Lincoln Road who's been saved for 6 months.
Amen.
Whoa!
Amen.
What's that, Pastor? What are you thinking? What the Charity Commission is going to say when we put down on former occupations? It's not going to work. It's a bit of a shocker. But this is what was happening. They were bringing somebody in to inheritance that had got no right. God does that, you know. God does that. And despite your past, despite your mistakes, despite how you feel, despite her background, despite people's opinions of her, she still inherited what God's got. You've got no right for it. No, we haven't. But we've got our rights in Jesus. That's what makes the difference. So let's not let our background, some of the things that have gone wrong. Can you just imagine what disappeared for this woman? Her house, her city, her morality, her dignity, her friendship groups, her culture, the way she lived her life, all that went. But she knew there was something better. She knew that God's purposes, even in her immaturity of thinking, she knew that God had got something better going on. And she would rather align herself with the spies in that light than the whole of her former life. That had to disappear. And here we go. God has said, destroy everything. Destroy everything, including her house. But when they tied the red cord, it was symbolic to say, move over, like the Passover. What it was really doing in simple language was, this, where the red cord is outside the window, is a place of grace. Judgment is deserved. This should be destroyed and everyone in it. But there is grace in this house. And for us, we need to realise that we deserve nothing. We've got a lot going against us. But when God ties that red ribbon of grace through the power of his blood over our lives, there's grace in our house. There is grace available despite our background, despite our past, that God has still got a plan for us. And she was responsible in evangelism. Can I just leave this to you about responsibility? Could you imagine this prostitute in her house, and she has this word from the spies, listen, we're going to flatten this place and kill everyone in it, but anyone in your little room will be saved. Would she go out and say, excuse me for the sake of example, Mum and Dad, would you like to come round to our house for some sandwiches? And he says, no, I've just been to Jimmy Spice's for lunch, and I'm full, thank you, I don't want to come round. Would she say, that's okay, I'll see you next week, maybe next week? Or would she say, no, I really want you to, it's important that you come. It's important that you come. I can't tell you what it is, it's important that you come. Oh no, I don't really want. She would say, come to my house! Don't be late! Why, just come! It's important. Bring my brother, bring my sister. In fact, bring anybody you can find. But just get to my house. Not for 12:05, but for 12 o'clock. It's not like my life depends on it. Yes, it does! Your life does depend on it. she realised the place of grace and all family were there. And yet we know the judgment that's on this world. We know the place of grace that God has created. And how do we tell them? Well, if you want to come to church, if you want to explore Jesus, that's going to be fine. You take your time. Actually, the urgency of a prostitute who had no formal Bible training, and she knew the importance of when God said he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And he called all the family and friends. She was responsible in evangelism. She didn't say, oh, well, somebody else go and talk to my mum and dad about it. Well, somebody else talk to my sister. I can bet you a pound or more that she didn't just walk around the city. She didn't just text or email or put it on her Facebook status, those that want to come round my house for lunch, please come. She would be banging on doors. Oh, but he's in bed. Get him out of bed. In fact, get the other end of the bed. We'll carry the bed. We'll do whatever it takes to get that person into my house. What would we do to get people? And this is the thing about responsibility that I said earlier, about crossing over. And this whole culture. We have a responsibility for justice. We have a responsibility in battle. And we have a responsibility in evangelism. Like an 85-year-old man, 5 young girls and a prostitute. They got that. Do we get it? Do we carry that responsibility for ourselves? You know, last thing. Then we're going to do a little bit of worship. Run out of water as well, so I've got time to finish. Prostitute, I've said all that, didn't I? The opinions of her coming into how dare you, prostitute. Do you know, God had got a bigger plan. Not only was he going to invite a prostitute into the promised land who didn't deserve it, a person of morals, he wasn't just going to invite her in as a visitor, he invited her in as family. Now, the reason I say that is this. You look through the Bible, you look into the New Testament, and you look at the genealogy of Jesus, and Rahab's there. Work that one out. God not only allowed her to come in, not through the skin of her teeth, but she was born of a daughter of God. So much valued was she, that she's in the family line as the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus himself. So she was saved once through the spies, and she was saved twice through her son, Jesus Christ. Wow. God not only accepted her, but he built her into a plan to bring a saviour into the world. Can you imagine those people in heaven? Yeah, I couldn't believe it when God brought a prostitute in. Could you imagine their face when they said, well, actually, that's Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-grandmother you're talking about? No way! Jesus couldn't have a prostitute in his family line. He's got the Son of God on one side, and he's got prostitutes and adulterers on the other. Humanity meeting divinity. Wow. I don't know what time to speak about that. Maybe today that you need that forgiveness, that place of grace where Jesus can move in your life. Let's just bow our heads really quickly. I invite the worship team to come back. I know there's been a lot of talking about trust. You've been inspired and challenged today. Not a normal Sunday. I'll be very quick with this, but is there anyone in the house, despite your life, despite your losses, despite your past, despite your disappointments, you're actually saying, God, I want to get to that place of grace where I can have a relationship with you again. Maybe for the first time, maybe to restore it, I don't know. But if you need to find that place of grace where you're saved and where Jesus can put that plan back into your life, your destiny for justice, for battle and for evangelism, despite the past. If you also want to pray with you or over you, just raise your hand this morning, I'll pray with you, put it down. We're not embarrassed, you don't do anything. Is there anybody here? Just want to give that opportunity. Okay. We're going to break bread this morning.